Well, Donald Trump can hang himself with his own words, number one. Number two, let's recall it wasn't that long ago when somebody told LeBron to shut up and dribble. I'm glad he rejected that advice then. I'm glad he's rejected that advice now. These personalities, these celebrities, these stars have their own agency. They are indeed fellow citizens, and I celebrate them speaking out. I'm not so sure what it actually does. I'm not sure people vote a particular way because LeBron said do this or do that. And I'm also concerned, Abby, about whether or not this string of celebrity endorsements plays into that narrative that Kamala is an elitist candidate. That does concern me. But at the end of the day, every one of us ought to be engaged in this process, and that includes celebrities like LeBron James.
Yeah, it is a fair concern because, I mean, nobody is surprised when a celebrity comes out for a Democrat. But I don't know that that's what she needs right now.
Look, I thought that this wasn't very effective because it was such an exercise in hyperbole and selective edits and putting it together with, videos from the civil rights movement and stuff. Twisting Trump's words in ways that weren't meant from a president that, for some strange reason, made funding for black colleges automatic, right? Not exactly the kind of thing a white supremacist would do. I thought that we were actually chatting before about Arnold Schwarzenegger's endorsement of Kamala, which was much more effective because what he didn't do was implicitly judge Trump supporters, say, you're racist, essentially, which is the subtext of this edit. He actually went a long way to kind of agreeing with them in certain ways and saying, I get it. I'm actually, conservative in these ways, but I'm still voting for Kamala, and I don't judge you for having your opinion. I thought that was way more effective.
You talk about twisting people's words, and you are twisting LeBron James' endorsement right now by saying he's calling all of you racist. He's not. He's saying Donald Trump is racist. Here's the proof. Here are his words. There are people who fought really hard for me to have the right to exercise my right to vote. I will do so, and I'm going to do so publicly. Now, I will tell you, there were a lot of celebrities who, for a long time, did not want to get involved. I think that Trump amnesia that we were talking about earlier in the year has been cured. I think that Madison Square Garden rally was a catalyst for those who had forgotten, who had still forgotten, to pay attention and remember the division, the hostility, the misogyny, the racism, just the horrible chaos that comes with this guy. It was a fiasco.
And I didn't see, coming respectfully, I didn't see any of Donald Trump's words being twisted in the video that LeBron posted, number one.
I am curious about what words
I didn't see any twist, number one. And number two, it's okay for campaigns to edit video to make their commercials, but it's not okay for LeBron to do that?
I'm also curious. What are the words that you say are being twisted?
So, he actually has a production company, so it could have been his.
But not him himself. And it's beside the point.
You think he didn't okay? You think he didn't approve what he put out?
Beside the point.
Tell us what you think is being taken out of context.
I think so. When you cobble together videos from the 50s and 60s of the civil rights movement, and you have Donald Trump saying essentially, "These people are terrible." What you're implying is that he is like the white segregationists of the 50s and 60s who thought black people were lesser human beings, should not deserve to vote.
That's exactly what he meant. That's exactly what he meant.
Okay, but that's not anything Trump has ever said.
Well, I think
so that is
I guess what you're saying that he's taking Trump's words out of context. I think Trump's words were in context. It's just that they were put alongside things that you objected to.
You think asking for the death penalty for 5 young men of color, black and Latino, and then never apologizing, never acknowledging that he was wrong. You think that's not otherizing?
I mean, what Anna's talking about
is most of the Congressional Black Caucus voted for the crime bill. It was a different time.
He was investigated for not renting to black people.
The sound that you hear of Trump at the end of the video, we have that full video, the context, right? He was on Larry King. This was in 1989, talking about the Central Park Five.
A reporter asked me whether or not I had any compassion or feeling for the people that did it. Do I have hatred for them? And I said, look, this woman was raped, mugged, and thrown off a building. Thrown off a building, on top of everything else. She's virtually, she's got some major problems, to put it mildly. I said, of course I hate these people. And let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done.
Maybe hate is what we need is the part that was used in the video, but it was used to make the point that Trump, at that time, took out a full-page ad in the New York Times proclaiming the guilt of these 5 black and brown men, largely because they were black and brown.
Sure, I don't want to debate what happened with the Central Park Five. I think we all know the story there. The question for me as a strategist is whether or not this is going to be effective. Most celebrities support Democrats. That's not a big surprise for me. That's been the case for a very long time. I think if you are going to lean on celebrities with the expectation or the hope that an endorsement will potentially move some of their followers, and I think you want the endorsement to speak to some of the trials and tribulations that people are experiencing. LeBron James grew up very humbly. He can certainly speak to poverty. He could have mentioned that in his endorsement. He could have talked about what it takes to accomplish certain things. And he could have said, I'm supporting Kamala Harris because all the things I've accomplished, I believe her policies will help a lot of other African Americans accomplish
Sorry to
something
interrupt you, but
similar.
I just
wonder,
wonder,
I didn't think it was effective, that's
do
all.
Do you acknowledge that there are some voters for whom that very idea of hate being a driving force of our politics is a central core issue for them? There are a lot of.
I don't know
there are
if
a lot
that
of,
ad.
Well,
I think
I
people's
guess what I'm saying is,
opinions on
don't
Trump are already
do
cemented.
you concede that there might be some voters who might look at that ad and say, yeah, I don't want us to go back to a time
I would love
when
to,
hate was driving
I would love to see
the leaders of
something-
our country.
I would love to see some data, whether it's quantitatively or qualitatively, that would lead me to believe that someone saw that ad and all of a sudden said, oh my God, I already dislike Trump and all of a sudden I dislike him more. I don't think that's the case.
But the data, sure, Michael, the data, respectfully, the data is already there, and it's been there for.
But that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah, but
though,
the data's there. It's been there for decades now. And we cannot deny at this table that racism is still the most intractable issue in this country.
That's not what I'm
saying.
saying.
And what LeBron is drawing attention to in this race, that race, in fact, does matter. We have a choice in this race between hate and love. We will see if love wins. But what's wrong with LeBron reminding us that race has been central to the campaign that Donald Trump has run?
I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is if you're going to use a celebrity endorsement, I personally think there's a far more effective way to potentially move voters
But
than
you're not his
compared
audience.
to that.
It may work with his audience. Just because it doesn't work with you doesn't mean it doesn't resonate with his
but I
audience.
wonder if
I think that's to the point. I think it was effective. I think the endorsement does move the needle slightly, subtly. We're late in the game. I think for 2 reasons. One, the message was powerful. It reminded folks above Donald Trump's rhetoric what the real situations are. I think secondly, if you're looking at the polling data, there is not as much support with black men that we're seeing pop up in the polling for Harris. I don't know if you could pick a better person, better spokesman for that audience to say, hey, look, don't sit at home. Don't sit this one out. Come vote.
But
Come
wouldn't
show
a
up.
better
And I
message-
think
but
he
what-
speaks directly to those folks, whether it be on social media, whether it be in television appearances, whatever the storyline.
But the endorsement didn't speak to black men. There is all of a sudden going to be new economic opportunities for you if you vote for Vice President Harris. That would have been a more effective endorsement on my perspective.
Who does Hogan's endorsement speak to? Who does Amber Rose's endorsement speak to? I mean, Donald Trump is parading out whatever celebrity he's got. It's just they're not as big a name as the ones
Anna,
that
I mean,
Kamala has.
you've been a lifelong Republican. You know Republicans have never had a large pool of celebrities to sort of bring out.
Yeah, but these are like the dregs,
So you're going to
right?
pull whoever you can get. My point here simply is, and I'm not saying that LeBron doesn't have a right to endorse whomever he wants. Of course he does. He's a great athlete. I'm simply saying, if LeBron called me, if I were a Democrat, and he said, sure, Michael, what is the best way for me to put forth a message to encourage young black men to vote for Vice President Harris? I would have said, talk about economics, talk about potential academic attainment ideals that we would like for black men to ascertain if they vote for her. Those things, if I'm a young black guy sitting on the couch and thinking, wait a minute here,
But
Harris is
let
going to
me
do this,
say
this is going to lead to trade, this is going to lead to me going to
I'm
school,
from
this is going to
Miami.
lead to me getting a better education.
Let me
I
say
may
this.
vote for
I'm
her.
from Miami. I remember when the Miami Heat players showed up wearing hoodies, protesting the Trayvon Martin assassination, what happened with Trayvon Martin. I believe that they take their platform, the NBA players, LeBron, Dwayne Wade, they take their platform with incredible seriousness.
That's not what I'm arguing, though, Anna.
They have the
We're
right.
having a disagreement over
No.
tactics. I'm not disagreeing
but why-
with...
but why-
Listen, the
why
guy's got
either
100
or?
million viewers.
But
I
why-
think he doesn't need
but why
advice
either-
from you on
But why
tactics.
either or versus both hands?
Well, I'll say either or, Tavis, and we've talked about this on your radio show. I think the vice president's campaign has done what they would argue an effective job of talking about race and a whole other issues as it pertains to the former president. The needle hasn't necessarily moved, I don't think, as much as they would like with those low propensity black men. The question becomes why? I would argue it's because you're not speaking enough about economics and other opportunities. And if I were advising LeBron, I think that would have been a more effective use of his
She's got a
platform.
whole